Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second COVID-19 webinar for school bus contractors. It is 1 o'clock. I'm going to give just a couple of more minutes or give some slow instructions or welcome instructions to everybody because we're expecting about 115, 116, and we're already up to about 100, so this is good. The system's loading in pretty well. All of you are on in listen-only mode, which is a nice way of saying you've all been muted. What I'm asking you all to do is, if you have any questions for Rich, that you submit them using the question function. Just type them in, and we will get to every question we can in the time we've got. We do collect all these questions and update our frequently asked questions document as well. Quick note, I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about what's going on in the Pennsylvania legislature, but any questions regarding that, we're probably not going to answer on this call because we're still waiting for final approval and to see how all of it shakes out. And we want to then have some conversations with legislative staff to make sure we understand completely the intent of what's being presented. So let me again welcome everybody. We hope all of you are well and staying safe during this time. I wanted to remind everyone again that we've got you all in listen-only function. Please use the Ask a Question function to submit your questions. This webinar is being recorded, and a link will be made available to everybody on the PSBA website in the members only section when that is complete. So before we bring on Rich Kelly, who is our presenter, I wanted to give you a quick legislative update. As you know, right now, the legislature is considering Senate Bill 751, or you may not know. That is the vehicle that's the school code bill that's being considered right now. And what we understand is the House has approved it. It is in front of the Senate, which went into remote session earlier today. I expect to have an update later on whether the Senate's going to look at that bill today or tomorrow. That bill concludes a provision that addresses funding for school districts and funding for school bus contractors in particular. There is a provision that is being considered that opens the door to discussion for you with your school districts to discuss the ongoing flow of funding to ensure that your personnel and fixed costs, including administrative and equipment costs, are maintained during the time schools are closed. The legislation ensures that school districts are going to receive their transportation subsidy this year and next year, which I know was a concern for a lot of school districts and was holding back conversation from a lot of school districts to talk with their contractors about funding during the closure. Stay tuned. We're going to get an update out to everybody, and we're recommending everyone to sort of take a breath a minute. Let us review what that legislation means for us, as well as we're also monitoring the federal legislation that's currently being considered in Congress, and Rich is going to give a quick update about that as well. Our goal is to have a member bulletin out to you all on Monday, Tuesday morning at the latest, but by Monday we're hoping that will cover the impact, review the impact of both the state and federal legislation, along with some talking points and guidance on how you might want to approach your schools. We know there's going to be a lot of questions regarding this legislation, regarding drivers that are currently out on unemployment, et cetera. And we're going to keep collecting those questions and do our best to get all your questions answered. This is a very fluid situation. There's a lot going on. So the best recommendation is to just take a breath, let us get our review going, and then we're going to get stuff out to everybody. And of course, we'll always be available to take your questions. And what we have heard from legislators is to let them know how this is working, and if we're having issues, they want to hear about it, and we will certainly go back and revisit our concerns with them. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. They are going to be back in Harrisburg, or at least operating remotely, to address any other concerns that come up as a result of COVID-19. With that being said, I guess I really should double check. Can everybody hear me? Can someone send me a quick note on the questions function to say you can hear me? Thank you. I usually do that in advance. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to now turn this over to Rich Kelly, who is going to give us an update on the ever-changing landscape of COVID-19 and school bus contractors. So Rich, welcome aboard, and thanks again for giving us your time and being here.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. And, thanks on behalf of all the contractors for all the work you're doing here in Pennsylvania. It seems to be heading in a happy direction. So let's cross our fingers and hope for the goal line here. On a similar note, at the national level, there has been a great coordinated effort by Kurt Mackeson and the staff at the NSTA on the federal level. As you know, at 1:30 last night, the Senate approved the version of another coronavirus bill. That bill, we have been lobbying to have language included in that bill that basically would say that to the greatest extent practicable, school districts would continue to pay employees and contractors during the period of disruptions and closures related to coronavirus. So it's language that we've seen in drafts. We are hopeful that it's in a final draft that makes its way to the president's desk, but stay tuned on that. The effort has been coordinated both at the state levels, at the state associations, and at the national level. And I think that as industries go, I really feel like it's been a great effort that seems to be heading in a good direction. One of the things that I wanted to kind of start off with is there is a lot of information out there. Some of it is even accurate. And I say that because a lot of it is not. You recall we talked last time about a decision table, and we have a modified decision table, and you can see that this is today's modification. That's the B version, meaning it's the second one. Yesterday's versions went all the way through the letter E, so that tells you how quickly this is moving. And I do hope and expect that we'll be able to circulate something either today or tomorrow morning that also includes an update as it relates to the bill that was passed last night. We've not seen the text of that yet. But let me start off by kind of showing you, here is a summary that a lot of people are pointing to, saying, oh, the program and the benefit period, the benefits will be available for leave that occurs from January 19, 2020 through 1 year after the bill's enactment. So a lot of people are saying, oh, okay, so that's when it all starts. But if you actually look at the text of the bill says that it is effective 15 days after the bill passes, which is April 1. So go back to this document here, and this document was actually prepared by the Democratic staff of the House Appropriations Committee. So that is, put that in context, the staff people that work for Democratic members of Congress. That is their interpretation of what this bill says. And I can tell you that it's not what it says. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we know about it overall, and then I'm going to talk about how it applies to your employees down here. So starting off at the top here, the Family First Act was signed on March 19. The statute says it's effective 15 days from enactment through December 31 of 2020. Among other things, it modifies the Family Medical Leave Act to increase the number of covered employers and eligible employees, and to provide paid leave. And again, you see this is what the you're seeing out there on the internet. But the Department of Labor has put out their own guidance saying that the effective date is April 1. Now that creates some of its own difficulties because people are looking for benefits right now on March 25th. So if you provide a benefit under this bill and it's not effective until April 1, how is that going to play against your tax deductibility and things like that? We'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about this section F, which is tax deductibility. As we get better answers, we will update it here. And apologies for the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty, but it's moving fast. So, as you know, the Family First Act modified the Family Medical Leave Act to change the employer to include all employees that employ fewer than 500 employees. But the Secretary of Labor can give an exemption to employers with less than 50 employees when compliance would jeopardize the viability of the business. There is supposedly going to be an application process for that sort of exemption. Between you and I don't expect that to be liberally applied. I really expect, especially if school bus contractors receive favorable treatment in federal and or state legislation, I do not expect to see small employers exempted under those circumstances. It also modifies the definition of eligible employee under the Family Medical Leave Act to mean an employee who's been employed for at least 30 calendar days, and that applies for the family medical leave portion, which you see down here in green. Okay, I'm sorry, the public health emergency leave portion, which you see here in green. But for sick leave, which you see down here in blue, that applies immediately, meaning if you hired the person yesterday, they are entitled to this blue leave right away. Some of the other things that it does is it modifies the qualifications, and we talked about this before. What that means is that under the old FMLA, you were permitted to take unpaid leave to care for yourself if you were ill or to care for a family member if you were ill. Well, this modifies qualifying need to include a public health emergency. And a public health emergency means coronavirus. So they're saying that, okay, the circumstances now don't just have to be that you're sick. It can be that there's a public health emergency and you need to care for your 18-year-old son or daughter, 18-year-old or younger, son or daughter, because the school is closed. And you can see that all of these citations to the statutes are over here on the right-hand side. Now, in terms of where is that money going to come from, this section F is really responsive to that. Employers are eligible for quarterly tax credits equal to 100% of the qualified sick leave wages and 100% of the qualified health plan expenses that are allocated to that, as well as the leave wages paid. When we talk about the individual people or individual benefits, they fall into these three buckets. Green is public health emergency leave. Blue is emergency paid sick leave. This orange is continuation of the employer paid portion of healthcare premiums. So if you read the actual text, we're getting a little bit of feedback there, Mike. I'm not sure if you can mute somebody. If you read the actual text, thank you. The sick leave wages and family leave wages paid are also not subject to employer payroll taxes. So that means you're going to...
Excuse me.
Bluetooth pairing.
Excuse me. Folks, if we could ask you all to mute, I'm getting some feedback. I've got everybody muted. I can't figure out.
Bluetooth pairing.
Excuse me.
Okay, we're going to continue. F. Employers are eligible for quarterly tax credits equal to 100% of the qualified sick leave wages paid under the FFCRA. The health plan expenses that go with that are also deductible.
I apologize. They're not on my list. Everybody's muted on my list. So, hello. Excuse me. I apologize, Rich. I cannot find out who that is.
Okay.
Power on.
We're getting feedback from somebody that's dealing with an unhappy child. So if you have an unhappy child, please mute the phone. Thank you.
I think that did it.
Okay. Employers are eligible for quarterly tax credits equal to 100% of what you're paying under this Family First Leave Act. That means the sick leave wages. That means the public health emergency leave wages. I have these things here in italics because this is one area where the statute departs from the regulatory guidance that we see out there. And I'll talk about that in a second after I hit this, which is the sick leave, family leave wages that are paid. If they exceed your quarterly tax burden, the overpayment would be considered a refund that is owed to the employer. So if you pay $10,000 each quarter in taxes and your payments under this would be $12,000, you would have a right to a $2,000 refund, which, according to what I've read, will be processed in 2 weeks. We'll see if that really happens. Now, I have this portion here in italics because if you actually look at the words of the statute, it does not really address the continuation of health care. But if you look at the old Family Medical Leave Act, what that act says is that this 2614 section says that if you pay benefits under or if you give leave under section 2612, then you must continue to pay your normal health care coverage amounts. So if you would normally pay 80% of that employee's health care benefits during family medical leave, this is olden times, you were required to continue to pay at that same rate while they were on their leave, which normally lasted for 12 weeks. Now, while the words of the statute, which is the Family First Act, that's 6201, section 3102, don't explicitly say those words, what they do say is that this section of the statute, 3102, modifies 2612, and 2614 says if you're paying under that, you have to continue this orange portion, which is continued healthcare premiums. Now, for most school bus contractors, that probably means your mechanics and your office staff, likely not drivers. But we are getting questions from people that are in that quandary that are twofold. Number one, do I have to continue to make those healthcare payments? And number two, for what duration of time? And number three, if the statute is effective on April 1st, what if I begin making that payment now? I don't have answers for that, but what we're counseling employers to do is to look at it case by case, person by person, do the right thing under your circumstance. And I think that school bus contractors' worlds will be slightly different, especially if they're receiving benefits from state statutes and or federal statutes. So, on that point, be aware of it. If you're hearing different things, that's why. Two other things before we go into the specific scenarios that I want to point out. Since this is a modification of FMLA, the law that controls FMLA currently is going to apply. Under FMLA currently, an employer is prohibited from interfering or retaliating against an employee that claims FMLA benefits. So you can't, if somebody comes to you in the olden days and said, I've got to take 6 weeks off because I need a knee replacement, you can't say, well, thanks so much, but you're fired. Now, I know in the school bus driver world that doesn't happen. We would greet them with open arms at the end of their 6 weeks leave and all that kind of stuff. But in the regular world, it does happen. But you cannot do that. You can't take an adverse action or do a termination because somebody has asked for benefits under the Family Medical Leave Act, which is asking for benefits under the Family First Act. Be aware that some courts have recognized personal liability for retaliation if the individual defendant is defined as an employer within the FMLA statute. And in the case of a small employer, that is likely The case that you see cited over here is out of New York, but I could have picked any cases, any number of cases from several jurisdictions in the federal court. So what the statute says is it defines employer, and these courts have interpreted employer, especially of a small, closely held company, to be that individual person. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the same thing applies. And again, this Family First doesn't modify ADA, but if you have a person that is perceived to have a disability, that is, I think I have coronavirus, I'm not sure, I haven't been tested, but I'm home with a fever, or my cousin was exposed and I had lunch with him last week, whatever it is, if a person is perceived to have a disability, they're entitled to the protection of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which limits your ability to terminate or take adverse action or things like that. And similarly, some courts have interpreted the rules of the ADA to mean that the person, the individual business owner, is considered a proper defendant in an action like that. Now, the reason I say these two things is that I feel fairly certain that probably within 6 months of all this happening, we're going to see billboards that say, were you paid properly by your employer under the Family First Act? I just got to believe it's going to happen because it does. So I point these out so that you understand that the risks of doing it wrong can be serious and can be personal. Now, I'm not looking to scare anybody, but I just want you to understand that it's not as simple as just kind of going on your way. With that said, let's talk a little bit about how to approach the decisions that you're going to need to make for your employees. Since this is a modification of the Family Medical Leave Act, the easiest, best way to look at your obligations is by each individual employee, and to look at whether you've got work for them or not, what is their status, what situation are they in, and then in this column over here, all of the, I'll call them white columns, are things that exist currently. The green, the blue, the orange are things that you will or will not have obligations to do under the Family Leave Act. The biggest differences are in these scenarios 6, 7, and 8, and we'll talk about them as we get to them. So let's talk about the first situation, which is probably the most common. Does your employee have work? Well, for a school bus driver, when the school is closed, no, they don't have work. Is the employee sick or not? They're not sick. So the employee has no work to perform. There's no customers to serve. The employer is voluntarily closed, or the employer was ordered to close. They have no regular payroll because they're not working. If they have sick time, they're permitted to take their sick time. Under that scenario, there is no benefit that is owed to them under the Family First Act for public health leave or emergency paid sick leave. But again, from this connect the dots evaluation I talked about earlier, because you are providing benefits, would provide benefits under here, conceivably you would need to continue this. That is the employer's portion of the health care. Now, we're talking with people in the Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division, and a few others to get clarification on this. So, what I would say is stay tuned and we will provide some additional clarification there. Second scenario, you do have work for them to do. And this may be either the mechanic staff or the office staff or some level of your own staff. The employee is not sick. They have work to perform and they are working either at the work site or they can work from home. The staff here at the firm, we are pretty much in that scenario. We're working hard, just like Mike is and everybody else is. They're getting paid on regular payroll. If they need to take PTO for whatever reason, they can take it. There's no benefits that are available under the green, that is emergency leave or sick leave. Health benefits are paid as usual, not under the FFCRA. There's no unemployment compensation, no citations there. This first line, by the way, I kind of glossed over it, but obviously that person is on unemployment. Moving down to Section 4, a lot of contractors have office staff that fall into this category. You have some level of work to do. Your employee is not sick, but they have less hours available due to a business slowdown or a lack of demand. You can pay them for the hours that they are working. Again, if they have a paid time off plan, they can draw on that. There's no benefits available under emergency leave, green, or sick leave, blue. And you would, again, from my Connect the Dots evaluation, be required to continue their health care at the same rate you would normally pay it. They may also be eligible for partial unemployment. Someone that's working 20 hours a week now instead of 40 hours a week can make a partial unemployment claim. Now, under this scenario where you're paying the health care, and under this scenario where you're paying the health care, I would certainly argue that if you're paying those premiums because of the Family First Act, that it would be deductible under this Section F language with all of this connect the dots over here. That's where I would recommend you talk with your tax preparer, your tax professional. I've talked to several, and they don't have any more of a clear idea of what's happening than you're hearing right now. But I would expect that additional clarification is going to come out on that point, and also come out on the point up here of, when does the payments actually start? And is that for payments that you make after a certain date or payments that were accrued after a certain date? Looking down at the next level, okay, which is scenario number 5, you have plenty of work to do. Your employees are not sick, but they refuse to come to work. We've actually had contractors, that is construction contractors, that fall into this category. Laborers are required typically to report to the work site, and they get their morning assignment to go here and perform, whatever labor, digging ditches, cleaning up sites, whatever it is. A certain number of employees that normally report stopped reporting. And then after that, they communicated to the employer that they were afraid to work and they were afraid to be places and all of that sort of stuff. Now, to the extent that some of this work is emergency-based, it could be considered life-sustaining. However, in that scenario, they clearly were not showing up for work. In that scenario, they're not on payroll because they are not performing any work. If they have PTO, they can certainly take it. There is no benefits that accrue to them under the public health emergency leave, and no benefits that accrue to them under the emergency paid sick leave. And under this continuation portion, I recommend that they look at this case by case. They can't get unemployment because they are ready and available for work and work is available. So they can use company leave policies regarding continuation. Small employers often make those kinds of decisions on a case-by-case basis. And this is where you want to be consistent. If you have allowed people to take unpaid leaves of absences in the past, you don't want to change that process, particularly if someone is going to claim that they are in a protected class of either gender or race or anything of that sort. So look at what you've done in the past and apply your decisions as consistently as you can. On a case-by-case basis, that would be the sort of thing you'd probably want to speak with counsel about. So the biggest sections where benefits come in are these last 3 scenarios, 6, 7, and 8. In broad buckets, the first one is your employee is not sick. You have work for them to do. They are not sick, but they're at home caring for a student. The second one is they are not sick, but they're at home caring for a sick individual. And the third is they are at home because they are sick themselves. If you look at the first scenario, your employee is not sick, you have work for them to do, but they cannot come in because they're home caring for a student. The first 10 days, they are not on payroll. If they have PTO, they can take it if they like. There is no coverage for the first 10 days under this green coverage, public health emergency leave. But under this blue coverage, there is coverage to the extent 2/3 of their regular rate of pay, up to $200 a day for 80 hours. So there's been a lot of confusion out there because people evaluating this and writing about it are reading this green section. And they're writing that the first 10 days are unpaid. And I can tell you that that is absolutely what the statute says. But if you read this blue section, it refers back to the green section and says that if you're in this situation where you are home caring for a student because the school or daycare is closed and your son or daughter is under 18, emergency paid sick leave will make that payment for a period of $200 a day up to 80 hours. That's 2 weeks. Now, some people are saying, well, I don't get it. Why would they choose PTO? Well, under your PTO, you might earn more than $200 a day. So you can forgo this and they select PTO. But I would assume that if they're being paid under PTO, not under this blue coverage, that payment is not tax deductible. And it is also subject to payroll taxes. One of the things you look in Section F under payroll taxes is that sick leave wages and family leave wages are not subject to that's employer payroll taxes. So again, consider that carefully. You may have employees that decide to get the higher rate of pay or would like to get the higher rate of pay, but there may be some good reasons to pay under this blue coverage. Under that scenario, again, we interpret it that you would be required to continue their health care payments, and we believe that all of that would be tax deductible under these connect the dots sections of the statute. After the first 10 days, that is 2 weeks, okay, you go down to this section. The employee continues to be unable to work after the first 10 days because school continues to be closed and you're caring for a son, daughter who is under 18. Again, no payroll. They can use PTO if they have it. Perhaps they have 3 weeks. And there is now coverage under the green coverage, which is emergency public health emergency leave. And you'll see the rate is the same. It is 2/3 the regular rate, up to $200 a day, capped at $10,000. You are still obligated to continue to pay for their health care. Now, if you look way over here, this is where you're reading they get 12 weeks of pay. And you'll hear people say they get 12 weeks of pay for public health emergency leave. And that's where it gets the confusion of, but the first isn't paid. It's not. It's paid under sick leave. And again, from a period of calculating, 80 hours at 200 is 2 weeks. $10,000 divided by $200 a day is 10 weeks. That's where the 12 weeks comes in between those two. Okay, so that's a situation where your employee who has work to do, they're not laid off because on unemployment, has work to do, is home with their student. Here, under scenario number 7, they don't have a student, but they are caring for a sick individual. Maybe your employee is taking care of their mother or their spouse or their Aunt Sally or whoever that is. If the employee is caring for an individual who is required to quarantine or isolate due to order of a healthcare provider or the government, or is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19. We have a number of people that are saying, I feel sick, and the employer is saying, well, don't come in. Okay, they're experiencing symptoms. Well, they're not on payroll. If they have paid time off, they can take it. They don't get any public health emergency leave, but they are entitled to emergency paid sick leave at the rate of 2/3 their regular pay, up to $200 a day for up to 80 hours. You would be obligated to continue their health care payments, and that provides them with 2 weeks of coverage. Last scenario was where your employee is actually sick themselves, and that's why they cannot come to work. That is, the employee themselves is required to quarantine or isolate due to a government order, direction of a healthcare provider, or they're experiencing symptoms. If that employee is making that report and they're saying that they've been infected at work or they believe they've been infected at work in the course and scope of employment, you should make the report to your work comp insurer. It's a whole nother webinar as to whether or not your work comp insurer would be obligated to pay it, but it is my recommendation that you make the report and let them figure that out. Now, if you look, that person that is actually sick at home, they are not on payroll. They can take PTO if they have it. They're not entitled to any public health emergency leave, but they are entitled to emergency paid sick leave, and you'll notice that the rate is higher. They're entitled to their full pay regular rate, up to $511 a day for up to 80 hours. That's 2 weeks of pay. They are not getting unemployment compensation because they're here on this FFCRA leave, and you would be obligated to continue their health care. So that is the rundown, and I realize that this is an enormous amount of information. My expectation is that by the end of the day, I really do want to get this in the hands of all of the members. And I though still caution you that even at that, it will be useful as a tool to make decisions, but there are still uncertainties here. You should be in close communication with your tax advisors. You should watch closely for things like the effective dates. Understand that the regulations, the way that it works is statutes are enacted and the regulatory departments, Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of the Treasury, the IRS, they're the ones that actually enact the statutes. So they will routinely, under normal circumstances, provide more detail and clarification than is found in the statute. So as this winds through, the direction of regulators that is found on websites will hopefully make things more and more clear. But what you do need to do is be careful of what you're reading and consider who is writing it, because the document prepared by the Democratic staff of the members of Congress is not the Department of Labor or a regulatory agency. It may or may not be right. They cannot make law, but the staff of the Department of Labor or Department of Education or those, they are the people that will make regulatory law. I think on closing, and before we kind of go into the Q&A portion, think also about this G&H section. I don't put that out there to make people afraid, but I put it out there because I feel in the interest of completeness, you need to understand that that exposure is there, and that I am certain that there's going to be people that, attorneys that will take those cases. And if they can find a violation on one of your employees, that attorney is going to ask, well, how many people work at that company and are similarly situated? So it's got the potential to grow. What we are recommending you do is you make a list of the employees that you have either had to lay off or the employees that are perhaps working partial hours, and actually kind of run them down in an Excel document. Are they collecting unemployment? Yes or no? Are you continuing to pay their health care? And I know for a lot of that situation, sometimes the amount that you pay in health care may be less than the cost of consulting with someone to say, should I continue to pay it? Understand that any payments that you make that are not strictly required by this green, blue, or orange portion may not be tax deductible here, but that's where your tax professional comes in. And understand that you may, in some situations, need to make a business decision, and again, the employee can make the decision whether they take PTO or they take FFCRA pay. But there's a difference in terms of tax treatments and things like that. There are many contractors that are paying amounts that are above and beyond the FFCRA because it's the right thing to do, or because their school district has agreed to pay them and they've agreed to pay the drivers, any variation of those things. But I think you want to evaluate your staff and make those decisions. And to the extent that you'd like to review them with somebody, certainly we are available to help with that. Mike, let me turn it to you to see if there's any questions that have come through that we might want to address.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, thanks, Rich. And we'll go ahead and we have a few. So again, if anyone has questions, please send them to us under the question function. As you could see, if we open up the lines, we get a lot of feedback. So go ahead and send your questions in. So here we go, Rich. We have employees who have always had independent kids, high school kids who can babysit themselves per se. What if you have a kid under 18? You don't really need to care for them, but you don't really need to care for them.
Right, I understand. They don't need supervision.
Mm-hmm.
If they elect to stay home to take care of an under 18-year-old child, the way that we read the statute, they are entitled to this pay. Now, if you have work for them to do, and they are still willing to do that work, whether they're working at home or coming into the garage or office to do it, then you're really in section number 2, okay? You have work for them to do, they're not sick, and they're performing the work, okay? The mere fact that they are entitled to this coverage doesn't mean they have to take it. But I would caution you that if you're in that scenario, you absolutely want to communicate in writing to your employer, to your employee, that you have made them aware of the fact that they are entitled to this coverage and that they have elected to waive that and continue to work. And the reason for that is, again, what people do now and what they recall 6 months or a year from now are going to be 2 different things. So you will be glad that you sent them an email. Dear Sally, thanks so much. We talked about the Family First Act and the fact that you could get leave, and I understand that you've elected to come in and work in the office with us so that you can be paid at your regular rate. Thank you so much. If anything changes, let me know right away. Love, the best employer in the world. Something like that. What other questions do we have, Mike?
Confirmation that the items you have in the green, blue, and orange columns, all this is effective April 1st. Is that correct?
The statute says 15 days from March 19, which is April 1st. The regulatory guidance that came out from the Department of Labor says April 1st. The only different date I have seen is from the Democratic staff of the House Committee on Appropriations right there. So that's as much confirmation as I can give you. Now, be aware, there's a bill that is working its way through the Senate right now that could change that.
Okay. All right. Next question. An FMLA question, perhaps, I have here. For employers above 500 employees, are benefits required to be paid by the employer as usual for option 1, which is no work, no sick, but are laid off?
Well, understand that that's an asterisk coverage even as we speak. And the reason for that is the words that an employer is required to continue these payments don't appear in the FFCRA, but they do appear in the base document, which is the Family Medical Leave Act. So I interpret it that they would need to continue those payments, but I also have it all out there that those words don't come from this act. Those words come from the base document, and the fact that this act here, modifies the section of the base document that says you have to continue to make these payments while someone is getting benefits under FMLA. There are some gaps in that analysis because it really doesn't talk about the duration there. Under this scenario, it's unclear whether it would be 12 weeks or 2 weeks. So again, I don't have any more clarity than that. I haven't seen other clarity, but we do have calls out to contacts within the Department of Labor, and we'll update that accordingly. The way people are dealing with that, primarily, ideally, your health care is paid at the beginning of the month that's coming up. So most people I've run into, they've paid their March premiums. They're going to get a bill for their April premiums either now or shortly, and they're going to deliberate as to whether or not they make that payment in full or in part. If you're deliberating about it, I refer you back to G&H. The cost of continuing those payments for a month is far less, I think, than the risk that someone later on is going to say that it was not right. Because again, consider what you're doing. It's not just dollars and cents. It's you don't have health care coverage. And what happens to them as a result of that if they become injured or something of that sort. One of the other wrinkles that one of my clients called me with is they had an employee who was weighing how much of their co-premium they would have to pay. And they said, well, I can do better on the open market and I can get healthcare coverage for less than that. So they said, I'd like to cancel my coverage and I'm just going to go, get coverage of my own. So the questions that came up are, well, is the employer required to still make that portion of the payment they would pay to the healthcare provider to the employee? And I'll tell you, I don't have an answer for that. And the second question, or my caution to them, is make sure you send them an email that documents that you discussed with them the coverages that are available under the FFCRA, and that they made that decision to not pay their coverage and thereby cancel that coverage with full knowledge of what's out there. Because the law also says that you are required, if you know someone is eligible for family medical leave coverage, you are obligated to do what you know is required. You can't hide from it. So I look at what is the cost of making the payment that you may or may not need to make versus the cost of being wrong 6 months from now. And I think that in an era where we're trying to secure the goodwill of our employees, that's probably the way to come down on that decision.
Okay.
Other questions?
What if you have? Yeah, we got plenty here. What if you have an employee who's been out? Excuse me. What if you have an employee who's been out on medical leave since before the implementation of the passage of this act? Do they still qualify for pay under the act?
That is a great question, and it's a first actually that I've received. I would think that if they are out for a previous FMLA reason, I really don't see anything in the statute that I read that then shoehorns them to now be available for this. But
okay.
Again, that's a question that's a first for me, and I can tell you that it's not addressed in the statute. But we'll put that on the list of additional research.
Gotcha. Are taxes taken out of the 2/3 pay?
If you go up to this section F, the taxes, the payments that you make are not subject to payroll taxes. So the answer to that is no.
Okay. What does symptoms of COVID-19 mean? And at any time, let me get this out here. And at any time, does the employee have to confirm through testing that they actually have the virus?
The text of the statute doesn't have any additional definitions of those terms that you see highlighted, experiencing symptoms of COVID-19. But I think that it is safe to say that the symptoms are basically flu symptoms. They're running a fever, they, feel nauseous or like you have the flu. So because it is not defined, it would take its normal and customary definition out of just common language and common usage. So if they say, I feel like I've got the flu, I've got a fever, I got a sore throat, I feel dizzy, I'm tired, I would say that they are experiencing symptoms of COVID-19.
Gotcha. Okay. Can you review the area of bus driver, no work, no pay, the scenario one?
The scenario one is what most bus drivers are in right now. There's no work to do. They are not sick, so you're not giving them payroll. If they get PTO, and most of them don't, they can take it. In that scenario, there is not a situation that puts them in the Family First public health emergency leave unless they have kids to take care of. Okay, but if they don't, it's just them and nobody else, then they don't get that. If they are not sick, they're not caring for someone that's sick, they don't get any of the paid sick leave, they are eligible for unemployment. And the questions about continued health care, but most drivers are not getting health care anyway. So really, that employee is on unemployment. And what I would say is you're going to have to make a case-by-case determination as to whether they receive any additional payments. Those additional payments might be because your school district is paying you in full or in part for your normal revenue, or it may be because by operation of the statutes, your school district has now decided to make those payments. And that is also case by case. I have contractors that have, say, 3 districts. One of them is paying full, one of them is paying partial, one of them is not paying. And they're saying, I want to retain all of my staff. Well, I recommend that you be careful, because if the school district that is paying you completely expects you to pay your employees completely, if you're not doing that because you're trying to spread that money around, be careful that you're doing it so that they know it. Nobody's surprised. I understand that it also gets complicated because you have drivers that drive for multiple school districts. They might drive for one that's paying and one that's not. So here's what I recommend. Given that we're going to have some statutory language in Pennsylvania, I believe you're going to need to approach your school districts and either negotiate an interim agreement or a modification amending your existing contract. And, we're prepared to help you with that. And I can tell you they're going to be, they're going to vary. And some of the things that you're going to have to deal with is what is your particular situation and how do you distribute the money that you have. Be aware that, again, if you pay more than your quarterly tax burden, you can get it as a refund, and they say that those refunds are going to come in 2 weeks. Also be aware that the Small Business Administration loans that are out there are, I am told, devoid of any qualifications regarding collateral, personal guarantees, or revenue verification or things like that. So, that may be an option as well. Other questions?
Okay,
Mike?
we're going to have we have a couple of questions that you're going to, along the way here, that are going to deal with the school shutdown and so my district has decided to continue to pay me through the shutdown as normal. I'm continuing to pay my employees as well. Should I track the wages I pay during this time separately? And if yes, why?
Yeah, I would definitely do that. Now, we've talked with our own payroll provider to see what arrangements they are making to be able to separate, wages and things like that. And I know that, we're recommending all of our clients talk with payroll providers to be able to make those separations. I think that you want to be able to clearly tag, we'll say, payments that you're making that fall into the green, blue, or orange buckets here, because those are the things that you're going to be able to claim as credits on your quarterly taxes. Other questions, Mike?
Yep. How do we document a claim of not sick and caring for a student made by a driver, and how do you authenticate the claim?
That's a very good question. And I think that you need to start off considering G and H. Okay? If you have some very, very valid objective reason to doubt the truth of that scenario, you could certainly ask. But I think that if unless you've got a really good objective reason, and I know some of the reasons that come up is husband and wife both work for the company. They've got 2 kids. The 2 kids are at home, and husband and wife both say, well, we both need to stay home to take care of the kids. Well, really? Now, again, if there's no work to do, they're both on unemployment. But if there is work to do, and it may be that they both work in the garage. Now, again, if they both work in the garage and the buses aren't rolling, you might not have work for both of them. So, I think that you want to, look at the scenario. Certainly, you have the right to verify the basis of their claim, but make sure that your challenge or your questioning of their claim is done respectfully, reasonably, and objectively, and non-discriminatorily.
if schools, and if this is, again, some of this will be is dealing with the pending legislation, Rich. If schools are receiving subsidy and continue paying the contractor, why would the contractor not continue to pay the drivers?
The scenario that I gave you, again, it could be that you service two school districts. One is paying 100% and the other is paying 0. And you decide, well, instead of paying the drivers of school district A 100%, I'm going to pay them the 40% difference between their unemployment and what they normally get. And that will make them whole. Now, if school district A agrees to that, great. But I wouldn't do that without telling them that's what you're doing. So there's one scenario where an employer may decide I'm being paid 100% by my school, but I'm only paying my drivers 40% because I want to pay my drivers of school district B who aren't, we're not receiving revenue from. Every scenario is going to be a little different, and your ability to do what makes sense and document it is going to be important.
Okay. School district seems to be stepping up and paying the daily rate, less fuel. Do contractors in this situation continue to pay their drivers the daily rate with or without taxes taken out? And is there a cap if this continues? Also, what if they began unemployment but have not received anything yet? They filed a claim. That's a lot of questions. There's a lot of language in the Family First Act that at multiple places says that no one is permitted to double dip. And I think they call it double benefits or things like that. So the statute is very, very clear that they want to prohibit someone from receiving duplicate benefits. And I believe that that's going to be applied practically. If you're on unemployment, you can't also get a paycheck. So you are going to need to, manage that employee by employee. I think that answers the question, or was there more to it, Mike? Nope, I think that answered it.
Okay.
If we choose to pay our employees their full rate because the district is paying the contractor, do contractors need to be concerned with what you're covering right here, or does that go out the door?
Could you repeat that? The last part of that? Do they need to be concerned?
Do they need to be concerned with this, with the Family First Act if they're already going to go ahead and pay their employees? Yep.
Well, and you know what? That's a good question, and I would think, just to kind of thinking about it right now, if you're receiving, let's say you're receiving payment for all but fuel because you're not burning fuel, and the agreement you made with your school district is I'm going to pay my employee drivers 100%, and you do that, you're really not paying them under any portion of this Family First Act at all. So that means that payroll taxes are going to apply. Everything is going to be just like normal. Okay, really, that's scenario. I guess that's really scenario 1. The employee, well, they don't have work to perform. Okay, but they're being paid anyway. And in the previous webinar, we talked about standby wages. Realistically, those are standby wages. You're making those payments pretty much premised upon the agreement that when school's back in session, they're going to come work for you. And if you go back to the previous webinar, I think it's not unreasonable to make that agreement clear. Whether they sign a document or you send them a letter, saying the ABC school district has agreed to pay us, provided we agree to pay you. And the reason we're making these payments is so that we are ready to roll when school reopens. So by receiving these payments, by accepting these payments, you agree to be ready, willing, and able when school reopens. Now you're going to have to deal case by case if somebody doesn't show up, but I think that's the sort of thing that you would want to put together.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your discussion about the double dipping or double benefits, if we have employees who have signed up or plan to sign up for unemployment, those employees receiving unemployment compensation do not qualify for 2/3 pay after a 10-day wait time. They're asking as a question. Do they qualify? And is it correct that they cannot double dip?
It is correct that they cannot double dip. And if they are receiving some level of benefits because of the Family First Act, I would expect that unemployment would refuse to pay them benefits. I mean, you can't prevent them from applying for benefits, but I think that's kind of the point here. If you're receiving this pay, I don't think that they're going to, that, state unemployment is going to allow you to also receive benefits here.
Okay, another question. If anyone needs to take off between April 1 and December 31st of this year, for the reasons being covered in rows 6 to 8, must it be directly related to COVID-19? If so, that leaves a lot of gray area if you're not diagnosed or tested. Is that correct?
Well, it's not just diagnosis or testing, because if you're experiencing symptoms, and that's just the flu, I got the flu, boss, okay? That's a pretty low threshold. And it may also be because their school is closed. Understand that what it did is up here, it added public health emergency to the reasons that are qualified needs under the FMLA. So it is, my child's school is closed and I have to take care of them, or I have to take care of a person who is either sick or feeling sick, or I am sick or feeling sick.
Okay. Since the effective date is April 1st, if someone would have work to do but is sick and has been told by the doctor to be off for 2 weeks just in case before the April 1 deadline or April 1 date, do they still fall under row 8?
Well, I would say that they fall under row 8, and I think that it's a really good question if they're under that quarantine order now and this act is effective on April 1. I truly don't have an answer for it. But again, that assumes that you have work for them to do. But the reason they can't do it is because they're sick or feeling sick or have been told to stay home. But if you don't have work for them to do, well, they're just on unemployment.
Okay. Question, since we've been off since March 14th, we've missed one payroll and for the drivers. If the district agrees to pay us, is there a waiting period until April 1, or do we make up the weeks since we were off?
If the district agrees to pay you, you're not making payments under the green, blue, or orange section. You're not on this page at all. Okay? So if the district pays you and the agreement you made with the district is that you're going to make your drivers whole, that may mean a retroactive payment to the payrolls that got missed. That's an agreement that you make between you and your school district, and it really is not any payment that is related to the Family First Act.
Okay. Do we want to keep going, Rich? We're at 2 o'clock. I've got a number of more questions here, or do we want to try to, I've got a list of questions here which we could compile, which I think is what we were doing.
Yeah, I think that we do need to do that. I don't recall when we started. We started at
1 o'clock.
Okay. I think because truly I've done, this is probably the 6th or 7th webinar that I've done, and they usually run over. And truly it could probably go for as long as I can talk. But okay. I think what we probably need to do, though, is we need to collect these, and we will do a Q&A document. I'm certain that we will do additional webinars. And if you have a specific or individual question, certainly you guys know where to find both helpful links, okay, which is the resources available on the PSBA website, which you can send your questions to office at. You can also send your questions to help@rckelly.com or to give us a phone call. This is, what your business council program is for. We will make this chart available. Like I said, you can see that this yellow stuff is yellow because I'm hoping for clarification. but I do expect that we're going to circulate an updated version of this by a member bulletin shortly.
Right, absolutely.
So I would say, go ahead.
Sorry, Rich, go ahead. I was going to say, so what we can do, and I know Christina has been logging in all of these questions, and we have them out here. We are been compiling them. We have been working on getting them kind of, I think, classified. Some of these questions we're getting are good questions for us to follow up with the state legislation that's being considered as well. So it's going to help us answer some questions. So get some questions answered for you on that legislation. So yeah, we'll definitely go ahead and get that prepared for everybody.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Again, the unity of the industry and the effectiveness of the advocacy, both Mike, that you and team are doing, and Kim, and all of the contractors that have been responding and providing ideas and things like that, and reaching out to the legislators has been spectacular. I'm seeing the same thing, again at the federal level and at the various state associations. It's I don't know, it kind of feels like a proud moment for the industry. So I hope you guys feel that way.
Yeah, and Rich, thank you. And again, we'll remind everybody, as I did at the beginning, to stuff is fluid and changing constantly, and we are in the process, and we'll continue to review and process everything, as well as, again, as I said earlier, looking at the impact, the overarching impact of both the state and federal legislation. So we just watch for further communication from us, and as well on that end of things. So unless there's anything else, Rich, again, thank you so much. We'll compile your questions. We will get these answered, and we will get a Q&A document ready for everyone to see. Thank you all again and we will, as warranted, we will plan for future webinars as well. So Rich, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe, and we'll be in touch.